I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today, IT's Time, Making 2020 the Year of Employee Experience. And we're very, very pleased to welcome as our special guest, Andrew Hewitt, analyst from Forrester. We are probably going to have a few people just joining as we kick it off. If you have any questions during the course of the session today, please feel free to enter those in the Q&A, and we will field those questions at the end. But especially excited to welcome Andrew. He's the author of a recent new wave on end user experience management. If you haven't seen it, it's a great publication. Andrew has been at Forrester for 6.5 years as an analyst. His key area of focus is on employee technology and the employee experience. He comes from an EUC background prior to Forrester. He's also the lead at Forrester in the area of remote work, which obviously has become very, very important this year. So as part of our program, Andrew will kick it off and he'll chat about the exciting research that he's done that brought us this EUEM new wave. He and I will chat for a little bit about that. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of Lakeside's view in this area. And he and I will chat a little bit further, but we'll be taking your questions as well during the course of the session. We'll get to those in the latter part. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, who's going to talk about IT's Time, really making 2020 the year of employee experience. And Andrew, I think I'll advance for you and just let me know when you want me to advance.
Sounds good. And thanks for having me, Bill. Thanks for the whole Lakeside team for having me here today. So excited to be talking about this space, employee experience and user experience management, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But thanks everybody for joining. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe out there. So, as Bill mentioned, my primary area of expertise is around employee technology experience. But Forrester has been doing a lot of research on sort of broader employee experience for quite some time. And so today I want to talk a little bit about some of that broader EX research, bring it back to technology, and then specifically the moment that you're probably all waiting for, which is talking a little bit more about the wave. So let's transition to the first slide here and talk a little bit about the value of employee experience. So we've been tracking this for quite a long time. In fact, at Forrester, it started on our infrastructure and operations team, which is the team that I still sit on today, as a concept called sort of workforce enablement. It was all about how do you get technology to the right people? But as that continued to develop, we started to build out the employee experience research practice that we have. And what's clear from all the years of research is that it's no longer a debate. EX is good for business. When we talk about what actually is EX, it is really the sum of perceptions working at your company across the people that you interact with, the technology that you use, the cultural norms and practices that you experience on a day-to-day basis. So it really is kind of that whole sum of your working life at your organization. And what we found through all the research is that if that experience is really good, you get some really distinct business outcomes. So higher productivity. It's very clear from our research that a better experience leads people to be more successful, more productive on a daily basis. They provide more discretionary effort to your company. So that means they go outside the bounds of their daily job responsibilities to contribute to the goals of the organization. And then the final thing is that they stay for long and fruitful careers as well. If you have a good experience, you're more likely to be engaged. And when you're engaged, you're more likely to stay at that company for a longer period of time. So there are huge business benefits to investing in EX, as I'm sure many of you already know and have already trying to improve as part of this whole pandemic that we're experiencing through 2020. I think this has become even more stark. And the research that we've done in terms of sort of like ROI for EX is if you invest across multiple different categories of employee experience broadly, technology, culture, manager expectations, and that sort of thing, you actually get a 53% payback on your EX investments over a 2-year period. So there are some significant business outcomes that you can get when it does come to employee experience. And one of the unique things that Forrester has done, and I'll transition to the next slide here, is we have released what's called our Employee Experience Index. And we released this back in 2019. If you're Dave Johnson is our lead analyst who created the Employee Experience Index. But essentially what it does is it measures employee engagement on a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being most engaged, 0 being not engaged at all. And that's really what we're driving towards when we're investing in employee experience. The experience is, what people are coming up against in their day-to-day working lives. The engagement is the outcome of what that experience is looking like. So this employee experience index measures that overall level of engagement. And when you get the higher level of engagement, that's when you start to get the business outcomes. And as we looked across this, if you're familiar, Forrester has one of the largest data sets out of any research company in the world, rivaling, even, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States, for instance, in terms of how many different data points we collect on the workforce. And what we did with this index was essentially go through there are a variety of different statements about the working experience that employees have, and we did a regression analysis which tells us which of those statements are most important for driving improvements in the overall employee experience. And what we found was that there were 18 total statements that were most influential in moving the needle when it came to the employee experience index, and they roughly broke down into the 3 categories that you see on the screen here. So there are empowerment factors, which is all really around, clarity in your goals, manager support, that sort of thing. Inspiration is all about the culture, the mission, and the values of the organization. And enablement is all about technology. So that's an important key takeaway for you here. So when we say it's IT's time at the beginning of this, we really mean it, because 30% of that overall experience is driven from technology-related factors. 30% of the overall employee experience total is technology. So as a CIO, as a VP, director level, basically anybody in your technology organization is going to have a huge impact on overall employee experience, whether that is good or whether that is bad. And just to illustrate that a little bit in terms of the impact of technology on the EX index, let's take a look at the next slide here. And what I've done specifically is take this EX index, put more of a technology focus, feature on this. So one of the things that we saw here was that specific technologies, specific statements could have a drastic impact on overall employee experience. So, if the employee, for example, says, I have flexibility in choosing the tech I use to do my job, their employee experience index goes up 13 points. If they have the mobile tech to do their job, 10 points. Tech support to keep them productive, another 10 points. Easy authentication to apps and devices I need, plus 8 points. And then the interesting thing, the thing that I think is most relevant towards this particular discussion is devices and app performance. So if they say my devices or apps break, often causing too many disruptions to my work, you see the opposite happening, right? -7 impact on the overall employee experience. So yes, technology has an absolutely pivotal, influential role in driving a better employee experience or a worse employee experience, or higher engagement or greater levels of burnout. So the stakes are actually really high for you as a technology leader as you start to think about the employee experience that you're providing with the technology tools that you deploy. So let's transition to the next slide here. So the good news is that technology leaders are, increasingly awakening to the level of power that they have to influence employee experience. And you can see it through a lot of the organizational priorities that they have, the things that they're investing in specifically. For example, in addition to the workforce participants that we survey to create the employee experience index, we also have a large group, I think it's about 10 to 11,000 different IT decision makers across the globe that we survey on an annual basis. And this year we had more surveys as a result of COVID. We resurveyed folks in May to look at how are their priorities changing. And one of the major things that we saw was that there was a greater emphasis on improving employee experience broadly, but also using a lot more data and analytics to actually improve that experience. So 64% of tech leaders say they will invest in data and analytics technologies to improve employee experience. 51%, a little over half now, are actually gold on providing the right technology experience to their employees, either at a team level, which is common, or at an individual level too. In other words, their bonuses, compensation is all tied to this. So that signals a fundamental shift in terms of how people are thinking about this. 29% are collecting employee feedback on the technology experience. And we expect that to go higher as we talk about the end user experience management wave. That's one of the big changes that's happening in the space currently. And 24% of organizations indicate they're going to invest specifically in end user experience management tools over the next 12 months. So, and that's in addition to what we already have in terms of overall adoption, which is about 30%. So you're looking at essentially 50% of organizations having these tools over the next 12 months. So let's take a step back a little bit and talk about what is end user experience management. How is it different from other tools that you might have on the market today? So if you would just advance the next slide here, and I'll talk a little bit about end user experience management. Here you see our overall definition here. And I won't go through and read it, but essentially end user experience management, came out of a lot of the device sort of analytics space, with Lakeside being, one of the primary players that kind of drove that, that revolution kind of on the endpoint, right? So end user experience management is really about looking at the experience of the employee from the asset that's closest to them. In this case, it's the device that they're using, and really looking at their user experience from their perspective. So I'm going to get information about the device. I'm also going to get information about the networks that they're connecting to, the applications that they're using, perhaps the authentication mechanisms that they're using to go and access various pieces of information. So it's really about looking at the real user information and the real user data that's being generated in real time, and trying to make decisions to improve that employee experience based off of that data. Now, that is going to be a lot different from kind of traditional monitoring approaches that are out there. Application performance monitoring, for instance, APM, it typically tends to be more focused on customer facing examples. Like you might want to understand how a customer is interacting on someone's website, for instance, and they typically tend to be server based, or they tend to be website, browser plugins, that type of thing. Whereas end user experience management is actually an agent that resides on the device and collects a lot of this information. So it's different from the broader APM market in that regard, that it's looking more holistically, it's focused on the endpoint, and is really focused on employee experience use cases overall. And it's part of it's a tool that's part of a broader strategic shift that a lot of organizations are going through right now. And if you advance to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about that fundamental transition. So, traditionally, when we think about the technology experience that we provide to folks, there's a couple of things that stand out. And one of them is that it's very reactive, right? If someone's device breaks down, they call you, you replace it, and then they get on with their business. So you're not really being proactive in terms of understanding when a device might break down or when an application might crash. That's a fundamental difference that's happening that the end user experience management tools can help with. Traditional approaches are often more technology focused. So you might say more of that siloed approach of, I want to only monitor devices, I want to only monitor apps, I only want to monitor servers. Whereas the end user experience, more modern approach is really looking at what is the impact on all of this on the human that's behind the endpoint, the actual employee themselves. Organizationally, there's a change that's happening where you would have different service owners with different responsibilities across different technologies, owning a lot of the monitoring. That is starting to get consolidated in centers of excellence, digital employee experience teams that are really hyper focused on employee experience. Quantitative, has been an aspect of how people have been doing monitoring, sort of looking at your IT metrics and making decisions, but increasingly more qualitative information is being brought into that too. So understanding things like user sentiment, using that for change management, that sort of thing. And then IT metric oriented versus business outcome oriented. So a lot of times we talk about SLAs, we talk about MTTR, incident, reduction, help desk ticket volume. All of those are great, and they have their place in terms of how you use them, but they're very IT centric. What's happening right now is that organizations are trying to link these investments in end user experience management with broader business outcomes. So things like greater collaboration between technology teams and business teams, better productivity for the individual end users. And eventually, I think the place that it's going is trying to link this to overall levels of engagement and retention of talent. So there's this shift to really connect these IT focused tools to more of that business outcome going forward. And there are some key use cases right now that we use EUEM to actually start getting closer to this future state. So if you advance the next slide, there are a couple of different use cases that we've identified as part of the research that are super important and are a great place to sort of look as you start exploring this market. So one of the major ones is sort of digital experience continuous improvement. So if we want to link to engagement, retention, productivity, we basically need to understand what that technology experience is like on a day-to-day basis and be able to track that over time. So these tools do that. Lakeside in particular is going to have capabilities for enabling you to score a digital employee experience, be able to track that, compare that across groups, et cetera. And really you kind of use that as a lever for continuous improvement for your organization. Proactive incident management is another area. I mentioned it earlier, but it's really about trying to anticipate when there's going to be a technology breakdown or outage or those types of things and getting ahead of it and trying to fix it before it actually happens. So, classic example would be something like, a device's battery is showing signs of wear and tear, and you can start getting information on that and then ship a new battery out. Before it gets to the point where it starts swelling and causing the computer to weigh extra and really just causing havoc for that end user, right? So that is starting to get more advanced, in particular with things like AI and ML, where we start to get more predictive about when that is going to happen. But it's an area that's the space is starting to move into. Reductions in MTTR, just by being able to have better root cause analysis essentially on different issues. With EUEM, because you have full visibility across all these different technologies, it's easier for you to basically say, okay, this issue on the device is causing this slowdown on the application or vice versa, right? So desktop transformation projects are often used in an EUEM context. So if I'm moving from physical PCs to VDI, cloud desktops, that type of thing. License reclamation is another big area, especially for ROI, just understanding who's adopted certain applications, and if they're not using them, let's reclaim those licenses. And then qualitative research and change management. This is one of the newer areas in the space, but understanding, for example, let's say I move all my users from Windows 7 to 10, and I want to understand, is their experience actually better? Or maybe I move from Skype to Teams and I want to understand, are they having any challenges with that platform? So the qualitative pieces, and Lakeside does this as well, where you can go and actually go out and get information directly on the device. So not an email, but a push notification, collect that information and use it to basically understand, okay, what we're doing here is either right or it's slightly off and we need to course correct in some way. So those are the key use cases for EUEM that we've identified. I'm sure there'll be others. What I want to do now is really reveal the fruit of all this labor that we've been doing in this market for the past year. So introducing now is the Forrester End User Experience Management Wave that we just published in Q4, which, if we look at this graphic here, there's a couple things just to orient you to what you're seeing here. But essentially, on the y-axis is the current offering, which is essentially the strength of the overall product. On the x-axis is the strategy, so the strength of the overall strategy here. You can see Lakeside Software did incredibly well. One of the leaders in the space, one of two leaders in the space here, 11 different vendors. As part of this, we went through a very rigorous process. We talked to 2 customers from every single vendor. We spent 2 hours with every vendor doing strategy briefings and demos. We had them answer a giant questionnaire. which I'm sure took a while to fill out. So I'm sorry, but it was really helpful for scoring this overall evaluation. But what you can see here is that Lakeside is definitely one of the strong, undisputed leaders of this market. So if you want to learn more about that, certainly, Bill's going to talk a little bit about Lakeside later on in this webinar as well. But just from my perspective, some of the things that were strengths here on the next slide, and this was all things that we sort of had proven out through the demos and strategies. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the strengths for Lakeside and why we thought that they were deserving of the leader status. So in terms of telemetry collection, Lakeside was one of the deepest platforms out there for getting as much information about different technology assets as you can, particularly on the endpoint front. They allow you to go very deep in terms of collecting different types of telemetry. Qualitative feedback, they have a good mechanism for basically doing collecting qualitative feedback on the actual device. So again, this is not an email-based solution. This is on the device. It's a pop-up. It comes up. User can say, I like this. I didn't like this. Here's my feedback. And being able to integrate that with the more of the quantitative metrics. They do a lot on third-party integration as well. So if you're, say, looking for integrating this with virtual desktop tools like Citrix or VMware, you're looking to integrate this with different endpoint management tools like maybe Microsoft Intune, different service management tools like ServiceNow, for instance, then Lakeside's going to be a pretty good fit for you because they're very agnostic in terms of their partner ecosystem and their ability to integrate a lot of these capabilities. And they also have, a very strong roadmap as well. I won't go too deep into that because a lot of that is collected as part of the strategy briefing under NDA. But we think that they're well positioned to satisfy this market of employee digital experience going forward with things like AI and ML and different capabilities like that. So we after talking to a lot of the customers, and you can see some of the quotes that we collected here as well. Feel free to read through those. It was clear that Lakeside was a leader in this overall market. So with that, I want to stop my portion of the presentation. I think we're going to open up for just a couple of questions, open dialogue between myself and Bill, and then Bill will transition and talk a little bit about Lakeside in more depth.
Great. Thanks very much, Andrew. That was fantastic. And as you have questions, please do enter them into the Q&A. I have a few with Andrew right now, but we'll get to yours very, very shortly. So, and a great presentation, a lot of really interesting and thought-provoking ideas and learnings from this. First question I wanted to pose to you has to do with the whole dynamic of work from home. And it used to be when everyone was working in an office that work from home was just a nice perk. Oh, can I work from home this Friday? Or I'd like to work from home a couple of days this month. It used to be a great perk. Now we're starting to hear a lot more about burnout, mental anxiety, depression for people who are used to interacting with others, and work from home becoming a challenge. Wondering, obviously your research talked about this a little bit, and I'm curious to what extent are you hearing about burnout today from people you speak to, and to what extent do you think end user experience management could and should play a role in addressing the part of that that's kind of under our control?
It's a great question. And when I had initially started doing this research back in 2017, I had the perception that almost everybody would want to work from home. I mean, why wouldn't you? You don't have to commute. You end up saving a lot of costs. You get way more time back in your day, that sort of thing. It's just more flexible in general for you to deal with different life situations. But people are actually fairly divided about wanting to work from home versus wanting to work in the office. 52% of US workers who are working from home right now, according to our most recent survey, said that they prefer working from home and want to continue doing it. 48% of them say they actually prefer working in the office and want to go back to the office. So it's basically an even split. When we asked people further about that experience, 33% of them actually said their mental health had suffered because of the pandemic and related challenges, with remote working being one of those challenges, right? So certainly burnout, mental health has been a major issue for organizations. And thankfully, I think we've seen a lot of positive movement in the direction from organizations to go out and try to help with that, right? And provide additional resources, et cetera. So that's been, I think, one of the silver linings of this pandemic is we're a little bit less afraid to talk about some of those things that maybe we shied away from in years past. So that's one thing. And I think when it comes to end user experience management, there's certainly a link here. It's more of an indirect link between burnout and end user experience management. But if you think about it, the number 4 predictor of engagement is the company providing a productive environment for me to get my job done, right? Out of all the different things that predict engagement, that's number 4. But also the number 5 predictor of burnout is devices and apps breaking often. So you can see that there's this tension in place between wanting to be productive and then a technology environment that is fundamentally frustrating to work in because everything is breaking down all the time. So if that's the case where you are working on a daily basis and finding that every time you try to get something done, your device breaks or the application quits and you lose all your work, that is a recipe for burnout. And how do you track that over the long term? That's another question, but certainly I would say that there is a link.
Yeah, regrettably, yes, and thank you for those perspectives. Here's another stat that you presented I found really interesting, which is the statistic of 64, I think it was 64% of accounts or organizations said they are going to be investing in data and analytics to improve the employee experience. And for those that are trying to start adopting this, how and where do you think they should start? They pick a use case, they pick an initiative. How and where do you think they should get rolling?
So the first thing I would ask myself as an IT decision maker is, what's my major challenge right now? From a experience issue, is it that I have really hard boot time, really long boot times or device related issues? Does it have to do more with, SaaS outages, for instance, with, my productivity suite that I might be using? And, kind of asking that fundamental question up front, I think is necessary to orient you towards, all right, what type of solution should I actually look at here? But as you start to deploy this, there are things that you can do to just basically just get immediate ROI from these solutions. So certain things like blue screens of death, like disk space, like just boot up time, overall latency, all of that stuff is things that you can automate, that you can get up and running very quickly. And a lot of the vendors will have templated, capabilities in order for you to go out and basically sweep up all the junk that you might have in your, technology environment and throw it away really quickly. So that can give you some immediate ROI because it's going to reduce your help desk, going to reduce your disruptions to overall employee productivity. As you go forward, you start looking at more of those advanced functions, being more predictive, using more qualitative, using it as part of change management. That's when the ROI starts getting linked more to the business outcome of employee experience, productivity, et cetera. But I would say kind of start with trying to clean house in terms of your different technology issues that you might have. And a big part of that is understanding, where do I have those challenges first, and then going from there to try to automate some of those basic things.
Great, that's awesome. And my last question for now, and we'll come back with some more, is for those who have already decided now I'm embarking on this, and gave some really great ideas for how do you find the right initiative. Once you get started, what are the typical obstacles that folks encounter that can be barriers to success?
So I would say defining the data that you want to collect is definitely one of them. You need to understand what data actually matters to you and what data is actually indicative of an overall problem. There's so much data that you could collect out there. Only so much of it is going to actually make a huge difference. So make sure that you do that due diligence beforehand to define those different data sets is super important. The other thing that people tend to think about is giving enough time for the data to show some actual trends. So when people actually deploy this, generally they have a period of like 4 to 6 weeks where they're out there just collecting data and seeing what comes back as well. So making sure that you sort of build that time in. And then the final area is really understanding that, or driving adoption really across, the rest of the IT department as well. People go wrong when it's just one person that's using these tools, for 4 hours a week, right? There's not a lot of ROI in that alone. You're not investing enough in it. So what you really need to do is have some good marketing, some training, development courses, that sort of thing, where you can go out and say to, the application owner, oh, here's how Lakeside would really help you with this specific application piece, or this is how Lakeside would really help you with VDI. And so you really need to drive that adoption overall to really make sure that you can be as successful and as well entrenched with these tools as possible.
Right, awesome. Thank you very much. I think everybody, no doubt on the call, has been some part of an IT initiative that looked really promising at the get-go and then hit obstacles. So that perspective on how to overcome those is really, really valuable. Next, I'm going to give a little overview of Lakeside's perspective on some of these topics, and then we'll continue the discussion with Andrew. Again, feel free to put your own questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. So Lakeside's perspective on the current state of end user experience today and what to do about it. In the next few minutes, hopefully you'll come away inspired with some additional new ideas and fuel for the discussion. So we're talking to a lot of customers today, both existing ones and new ones, and we're hearing an awful lot in the market today. I wanted to just share 10 things we're hearing, and then we're going to invite your perspective as to the extent to which you're experiencing or hearing and feeling some of the same. First, enormous pressure on IT to ensure that users can be productive today and are productive while they're working from home. Remote work setups need help, especially in the area of home networks and Wi-Fi. Much greatly increased need for automation and pressure for automation, especially around anything around end user and endpoint monitoring. A lot of executives and CEOs are asking, are my employees being productive? Are they being as productive as they can be? As a leader myself here at Lakeside and a previous company just before I joined here, we were asking this all the time. Not so much was Big Brother watching you, but more just how are people doing? Are they productive? Are they not? Do they need a break? Do they need time off? Do they need time to sharpen the saw? Are they burnt out? What do we need to do to help make sure people are just happy and motivated and engaged, because it's so different when you can't look people straight in the eye and see their body language in an office to know how they're doing. Becomes very different when they're anonymous and without a face or video on a Zoom call. The actual reality of end user experience today is often unclear or unknown. People may have incidents and problems that they're just not reporting, and frustrations that they're just dealing with because they don't want to be a pain to the IT people to ask for help. New security issues, and these are two different ones in number 6 and number 7. The first one is corporate devices are on unknown networks, namely home Wi-Fi's, and number 7, this very difficult trade-off between the level of endpoint or desktop security imposed on a laptop or a desktop system and the end user performance. Have we imposed so much security that the end user performance is now suffering? Number 8, the wave of desktop virtualization is continuing, going strong for cost, flexibility, scalability purposes. And number 9, device replacements have largely been on pause during 2020. That refresh cycle is expected to increase in 2021, both because of the backlog and demand and also people going back into offices at some point later in the year. And then last, with this move to cloud-based applications, very tough to ensure the performance of those Zoom, Salesforce, Slack, Teams, et cetera, when they are now all outside of the corporate network. So these are 10 different pressures and trends that we are seeing and hearing. I'd like to open up to you, the participants here, and ask you to what extent, which of the following are you most experiencing today and looking into 2021? So we'd ask you to just go ahead and vote on which one of these 10 are hitting you the most as you look at the path into 2021, or what you're seeing today going into 2021. So we'll give you just a few moments to respond to this. There's no right or wrong answer, but we'd just love to see what pains and pressures you are seeing today and which of these are the most prevalent. So top 1 is remote working setups need help. Home Wi-Fi networks, no doubt, with family members video calls, people playing games and all that kind of stuff comes out as the number one. And then the next ones are tied with the pressure on IT to be sure users are productive wherever they are and wherever they're working. Right up there with increased need for automation around end user and endpoint monitoring, and actual reality of the user experience is often unknown. So thanks very much for participating in that one. We'll have a couple more coming up along the way. A couple of stats from some recent studies. Andrew raised one of these from the Forrester research, similar to what we're seeing out there. The first two from a Gallup poll, September 2020, 33% of US workers are always working remotely, and another 25% said they are working remotely sometimes. So either always or sometimes is, was it 60%, almost 60%. 2/3 of remote workers said at that time they want to keep working remotely, not too far off from what Andrew presented in his statistics. University of Chicago just came out with a study a few days ago, the Booth School of Business with some other partners, that post-pandemic, 25% of all work days are expected to be remote. And then lastly, a stat from FlexJobs and Mental Health Association of August 2020, 75% of workers had experienced burnout in some level. So very, very interesting statistics about what's going on. I'm going to give you all one more poll. Let me figure out how I can bring this up. Stop share results. Sorry, that was hanging out there on the screen. Now I'm going to just ask you for your perspective on what percentage of your workforce do you expect will be working remote after the middle of 2021? Was just on a group of customers speaking to us just a couple of weeks ago, and I was astonished at the very, very high percentage of their workforces that were remote today, but very interested in your perspectives after the middle of 2021. What are you projecting the percentage of your workforce will be that's working remote after the middle of the year, when hopefully vaccines are a little more broadly distributed and we're seeing more evidence of the quote new normal, whatever that's going to look like. So very interested. 2 more seconds. All right, great. Survey says biggest number, 50 to 60% at 24%. So about a quarter of the people think 50 to 60%, 51 to 60% will be working remote. Find very interesting when you look at the numbers above that, you've got another 6, 12, that's almost 20% and 18%. So a huge majority, the majority are somewhere above 50%. 50% was the quartile, but look at the number above that. When you look at the number above that, it's more than 50% of the people are looking at more than 50% of the workforce to be working remote even after the middle of the year. So very, very interesting number here as well. So let's go ahead with some revelations here. What we're seeing, you saw Andrew present the Forrester view, and we would very much concur with that, perhaps just expressing it just a little different from a technology perspective. In the old world, people were measuring the user experience really starting at the data center, which is kind of an inside out sort of view of the world. But when we've got apps like Zoom and Salesforce and Slack and Teams and a whole bunch of other cloud-based applications, the world is really shifting to where we're now seeing a measurement of experience the other way around. Given that shift to cloud apps, it becomes even more important because the data center may no longer really belong to you, and it's not even something you're allowed to instrument. So IT will be measuring more and more the end user experience from the device outside in. In the old world, you had IT keeping lists of assets. What hardware do we have? What software do we have? And the usage intelligence was very, very different. Today, we're looking at really more, instead of asset management from these lists of assets, and I'm going to update my hardware on a time-based cycle. Now what we're seeing in the new world is asset intelligence. I'm updating my hardware based on how it's being utilized and the intelligence I have about how that hardware is being utilized. I'm negotiating my software agreements based on how that software is being utilized, the intelligence I have about how it's being utilized. The old world of SLAs, certainly you want to respond quickly with certain types of service level agreements to make sure you're responsive. What we're seeing now are much more experience level agreements in the new world. What is the experience of my end user, and how can I deliver the right outcomes to the business based on the experience those users are having, not just how quick is my IT response time to incidents and tickets. Towards that end, you saw Andrew talking about reactive versus proactive world. In the old world, the user calls the IT help desk with problems or submits tickets electronically. In this new world, we see IT predicting and preventing user problems by better predicting what's going on. What we're seeing is IT is proactively preventing and eliminating tickets and problems, not just reacting to them. So I'm going to do another quick poll for you, and would like to ask the following of you. Let me stop sharing that results. Didn't realize that was still on the screen, so sorry for that. And we have one additional poll for you here. In this world of old versus new world, where do you see yourselves today? Are you just starting on this path and journey? Are you partway or midway along the journey? You already are at the new world. Do you feel this new world versus old world really isn't happening for you, or you're not seeing it? You're very happy where you were at the old world and very proud of it, or just not sure. So love to get your perspective on the journey from this old world to the new world of IT. Great, thanks very much. I'll end the polling and show you the results. Very interesting. 50% of you say you're midway along the journey, which is great. For those 29, almost 30% who are already at the new world, congratulations. I hope you're still going to learn something new in the course of this discussion. If you've already arrived at the new world, hopefully in the next few minutes, you'll still learn some new insights that are inspiring for you. 18% just starting, and a small number that not sure. So thank you for that perspective as well. And nobody disagrees. Nobody thinks the old world is kind of where you should be. So I'm going to assume also for those who are partway along the journey, there's still learnings for you as you continue along the journey. So what's this look like to get to the new world? Well, we see three key areas as important for getting to the new world. And the first of those is broad plus deep data. I'll call it content. We all know there are a lot of different things that can go wrong in an endpoint. Some of them you don't even control these days when people are working from home and you're no longer at a place where you can see directly over someone's shoulder what's going on in their desktop. So you need almost unlimited data capture capability, because content, that data or that content, is really core to the detection capability. And we all know having a rich history is super valuable because it allows us and you to look into the past to see how did things actually work when it was going right, or they were working correctly. How long has this problem actually been happening is just really important. So fundamentally, at a foundational level, you need a underlying platform technology that can give really broad, really deep content at that core foundational level is now the foundation for the second part, which is sophisticated detection capability. So having that content enables and allows you to have sophisticated detection. I'm going to assume many or most people on this call own a car today or have owned a car, and so you can appreciate this example and an analogy. If you have a noise coming from the engine or you have a transmission problem, when I take it to the shop, I'm sure many of you may have experienced this. Undoubtedly, I get to the shop and it will not be having that problem. It'll be working perfectly. There'll be no noise. And the mechanic will say, well, I don't know what to tell you, Bill, but it's working fine today. And so what do? Having the ability to detect that problem and understand what it is at any time when it's happening, and having a record of that is really key. So a lot of times the fixes of the remediation aren't necessarily all that difficult or complicated, but you need to be able to detect and understand what the fundamental problem was, because replacing the broken part of the car isn't nearly all that hard or difficult, but it's the figuring out, detecting what the symptoms were, what the problem was, so then you know what to replace in the first place. That's the big challenge. And so it's all about having very sophisticated detection capability, building on that very broad, deep data content. And then lastly, supporting all that is a notion of edge and cloud. With the move to cloud apps outside the corporate network, and there being kind of less focus on what's happening in the corporate data center and the corporate network, the records and capabilities at the edge and in the cloud, really, really important to have those complete, especially if and when there are service interruptions. Speaking of interruptions, did we lose Andrew? Hopefully he will be back soon. And hopefully everybody else is still here. So let me move ahead. Our mission as a company is to improve the everyday computing experience for people in our customers' businesses, simultaneously with improving people's job satisfaction and productivity. So how's Systrack work? Systrack is our product. How's that work? We collect data at the endpoint. So think of 3 stages and portions of this. We collect data at the endpoint, so a Systract agent, a very lightweight agent, is installed on the physical or the virtual desktop. And that agent gathers and sends a summary of endpoint data to the master in a centralized place. The middle, we see centralized analysis, whether that's in the cloud or on premise, and more often today it's in the cloud. That endpoint data is analyzed by the Systract local master, and then the monitoring and management takes place and remediation. So by monitoring and analyzing all that data, we can act on it, leverage those insights in the IT environment in real time to be able to provide feedback, whether it's automated remediation, self-help, or advice and input to the IT help desk and the service desk to be able to take action proactively to address those problems, or if it's a reactive incident, to execute that reactively. The endpoint monitoring approach, for some people, it's on-premise because of security reasons or governance policies, or it's in the cloud. The approach here is to look at every device, physical PCs, physical virtual servers, virtual desktops, and collect more than 10,000 metrics on each endpoint every 15 seconds. That could include how the CPU is performing, what's going on with memory, disk, network, etc. And that lightweight agent consumes a very, very small amount of the CPU. Areas where end user experience management delivers value, we typically discuss them in 3 areas. We think about them in terms of staff productivity. How are we reducing interrupts and slowdowns? How are we helping reduce major outages? How are we speeding up ticket resolution? In the center, you see IT asset optimization. So that means software license reclamation, hardware right sizing, hardware performance management. In the middle of those 2, you also see powering IT initiatives like successful desktop transformation projects and providing all the key metrics for IT reporting and service provider contracts. And then on the far right, service desk efficiency, which also includes preventing incidents and tickets. So this could include reducing ticket volumes, accelerating troubleshooting, self-help, and automation. And hopefully people can hear me still. I don't hear anybody complaining. Let me just check to be sure we're okay. I'm not seeing myself, so I assume somebody's going to tell me if there's a problem. Just look at the Q&A to be sure nobody's complaining. Okay, great. We're still, Andrew, you're back. We lost you. Andrew, can you still see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we should probably put environmental disruptions on this. We had some wind and I just lost all the power at my house, so I apologize.
Oh no, sorry about that. I kept going, so
back.
Great. Welcome back, Andrew.
Good. Okay.
So some simple examples of what this looks like. A government financial institution, for example, key challenge was high software licensing costs, VPN bottlenecks for remote workers, tough identifying root cause of issues. Their solution, we reported and analyzed and understood unused software licensing to rationalize those. They got a 19 times ROI through their software rationalization effort and discovering client issues for remote workers and measured the end user improvements to communicate the value of IT to the business. Here's one example in unused software. Give you another example of improving the end user experience with proactive monitoring. Retail and hospitality industry just had a huge volume of user reported issues and it took them a long time to resolve them, and it was tough to identify the root cause. We helped give them the visibility and reporting they needed, and the results were improving their average end user experience score by 28% in 3 months, fewer end user complaints and tickets as well. But another company found just extraordinary ROI off of monitoring all of their endpoints in terms of the help desk cost savings, right sizing of their assets, and improvements in employee productivity. A huge ROI in the neighborhood of literally $6 million. And even if they only achieved a fraction of that going forward after initial ROI, still covered their return on Systract multiple times over, many times over. So Andrew, we've got a number of questions that we'd love to pose you and get your perspectives on. The first of those is, what industries out there are you getting the most inquiries from about end user experience management? In particular, what industries see the most success with end user experience management?
Sure, it's a great question, Bill. So I think there's two primary things that we see in terms of industries, and one is greater complexity, as well as the scale and size of the overall organization tends to correlate with a lot of EUEM success. So a lot of the major industries that we've been hearing from are number one by and far is financial services. So big banks in the United States as well as in Europe that are large in scale and also typically have very complex environments, might have a lot of legacy applications, traditional tools that they might be using, maybe even virtual desktop environments at scale. That tends to be a really good place because they can often get a lot of ROI very quickly by automating different issues that they might have within their overall environment. So financial services is typically one of the classic industries that EUEM would be suitable for. The other two are professional services, and professional services comes up quite a bit because of just the role that knowledge work plays in the overall organization. And typically people aren't really using things like ruggedized devices or frontline worker devices, but are really just trying to have the most focused experience that they can have, consultants and so forth. So that tends to be another big area that we see a lot of industry adoption of EUEM. And then the final one, which is very similar to financial services in the sense that they tend to be incredibly large and incredibly complex, are pharmaceuticals. So some of the biggest pharma companies in the world, particularly in the United States, have invested in EUEM recently as well. So we tend to see a big value proposition for those large, very complex IT shops that have a lot of things that they can automate right from the get-go and have a lot at stake when it comes to enabling people to work in a way that's least disruptive as possible. So I would say those three.
All right, great. Thanks very much, Andrew. Another question about virtualization. We talk a lot about virtualization. Would you say Microsoft WVD is in scope here now too?
Absolutely. Yeah. WVD has been one of the major topics of inquiry discussion this year. We've seen a lot of growth, both, from the numbers that Microsoft has released, but also in our own research here at Forrester. And so people are really looking for, how do I ensure that that experience on WVD, if I'm going to roll that up really quickly, is as good as it can be. And in particular, because WVD does require some hands-on management from your own IT staff, being able to have better visibility in terms of that performance is going to be a huge capability that EUEM is going to continue to serve. So we're seeing more and more interest in virtual desktops for experience management. It's not just WVD either. It's some of the others that are on the market as well. So a lot of broad interest in virtual desktop, a lot of value proposition for being able to look at telemetry data within those virtual environments and ensure that experience is really good for the end user.
Great. A question following on from that, almost a similar and expanded theme, taking this virtual desktop a little further. How does the employee experience differ between physical devices and virtual desktops / VDI?
Yeah, it's a great question, and frankly, a very classic question as well. It's something that people deal with all the time. And the answer from an analyst perspective is the classic, it depends. If you're willing to go down the path of VDI and really invest in making that experience really good, that means really investing in things like more storage, more memory, higher levels of CPU, and then you locate that VDI instance close to that end user so you don't have a ton of latency. The difference between someone using a physical device and a virtual endpoint should be indistinguishable. But the problem is that a lot of that, does require additional investment beyond just kind of your nuts and bolts of VDI. So if people don't invest in that, those extra tools to make sure that performance is really good, then typically what you see is a degradation in the overall technology experience of someone using a virtual desktop versus someone using a physical PC. So if you think about it, virtual desktop is essentially taking someone's keyboard and then hosting it maybe hundreds of miles away, and you have this added latency. So depending on your level of investment, you can make that indistinguishable. But I find a lot of clients tend to underinvest, which ends up kind of biting them in the long term because the performance ends up being less than ideal. So it's possible, but you really have to prioritize it to make sure that that experience is really good across, physical and virtual endpoints.
All right, great, thanks. Curious, there's a question that asks, have you seen a trend in organizations increasing or decreasing their budget for digital transformation? What's the trend looking like today?
Absolutely. So 51% of technology decision makers today say that their company has experienced decreased revenues as a result of the pandemic. A little over 60% of those folks say they're actually actively decreasing investments in technology overall. So there's definitely an impact that is, the macro economy is having on people's investments for digital transformation. That being said, if you look at those folks that are investing in digital transformation and continuing in those investments, about 30 or so percent of them overall, the key areas that they're looking at: mobility, IT, information security, cloud infrastructure. You can see that they're kind of preparing for this future world of more flexible, more remote working going forward. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see increasing divides between those folks that are able to make those investments now and their ability to survive and to differentiate themselves into the company versus those that end up having to decrease a lot of those digital transformation efforts. It's going to be harder for them to compete in the long term. You won't see those results right now in the next year or so, but there's going to be some long-term ramifications of not making those investments now.
Interesting. This question was here before you just answered it, and part of your response actually answers this question. But with COVID, a lot of organizations are facing a cost crunch and shying away from digital transformation, investing in new tools. How are you? What are the best ways to convince them to make that initial investment?
So the major thing is that EUEM can really have a good, kind of ROI upfront, and that actually can save you quite a bit of cost upfront. And particularly the more complex your environment is, the more likely you're able to get a bang for your buck right away. So typically, what I hear from a lot of our end user customers is that making that investment in EUEM is worth it because I can start automating a lot of the key issues that might happen at an L1 level help desk, for instance. So it might be things like disk space, automating all of those. If I hit 80%, let's clean the disk and make more space there. Let's reduce the amount of blue screens of death that we have. That gives us more time back from the employee perspective to focus on being productive at work. Let's ensure that our application crashes and hangs are less frequent. And that gives more time back to the employee as well. So there are a couple of sort of baseline capabilities that EUEM can basically help clean shop and help you to actually get to the point where you're spending a lot less time fixing very common issues that might be rolling up from the employee experience perspective. So that initial ROI in terms of really dealing with some of the complexities in the environment is one of the major reasons why people will buy EUEM up front, even if they might be decreasing investments in other areas. The hope is that they can kind of be long-term focused on predicting different outages and break fix scenarios so that they can further reduce those costs in the future. But for now, kind of that initial automation, scripting, and so forth plays a very strong role in making sure that those costs get recouped from the initial investment in EUEM.
Great, thanks. And the last question, we find user experience can be subjective, especially for remote users. What insights and business cases do you think help justify investing in user experience management as businesses look at their current conditions? So what insights and business cases are the strongest to help justify investing?
Sure. So I would say certainly start with what I was just talking about, which is that initial clean house, right? Can I automate a lot of common issues, save costs, reduce help desk ticket volume, reduce my mean time to resolution for different issues? So those are kind of your traditional IT metrics that you would look to. And those are going to provide you more of the immediate short-term ROI that are going to be important in the current economic conditions that we're in. As we start to think about long-term UX, one of the most illuminating things that I've learned in all of my research here at Forrester is that what satisfies people the most is making progress every day towards something they find is most valuable to their work, that is meaningful in their work. And so that idea of the progress principle, the ability to be productive each and every day is fundamentally linked to engagement of employees as well as retention of that talent. So if that UX, even though it is a soft kind of intangible element, if that is out of whack, if employees feel like they can't get that work done because the user experience is such that there are impediments to getting that crucial work done, that's going to have that long-term impact on employee satisfaction, on employee engagement, on retention of talent in the long term. So I would say that there are some, short-term ROI benefits in terms of cleaning house, and then there are the longer-term benefits of, okay, what is it like to work in an organization month after month, year after year, where the user experience is so terrible that I can't get any work done? And we've heard that from a number of clients where they say, I think, employees are leaving because the technology is not, up to par. It's not enabling people to be successful and stick to that progress principle over a long period of time. So as people build their business cases, they're looking at both those tangible IT cost savings, but they're also looking at those long-term intangibles around engagement, satisfaction, and hopefully retention of talent in the long term.
Awesome. Andrew, thanks very much. We're out of questions and out of time. We really appreciate you joining us for this webinar. And again, thanks very much. And thank you all for joining.
Thanks for having me.